everyone, Betsy Chasse here. I am really excited and honored to be joined by an amazing, just somebody I recently found out about. One of our other creator network members shared an article of his on our platform, and wow, I had to read that article a couple of times because of the depth of wisdom and information that really I thought I knew but needed to hear. And so I'm welcoming today Charles Eisenstein. He's an author of multiple books, including Climate, A New Story, Sacred Economics, and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. Recently, he published two profound and important essays on the current events humanity is experiencing, the coronation and the conspiracy myth. So welcome, Charles.
Hi, Betsy. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, wow. And I have to kind of dig. I love the piece behind you. There's a lot of depth in there as well. One of the things that you talked about in one of your pieces was this idea that it's separation, and our separation from ourselves, from each other, from nature, and from consciousness, or from some sort of spiritual connection, is part of what's really causing what's going on in the world. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of my life trying to trace what is the origin of the wrongness, which isn't to say that there's not a larger rightness and perfection that encompasses the wrongness, but looking around the world, there's so many ways, so many problems, so many crises. And what do they all have in common? What's the common root? And what I identified was the basic mythology of civilization, which says who you are is a separate individual in a world of other, in a world of competition, in a world of scarcity, in a world where full beingness is only in the human being. And outside of you, it's just a bunch of randomly colliding protons, neutrons, and electrons. So we're kind of alone here. And therefore, in that story, progress means increasing our ability to dominate the other. And then, so, you can apply this to medicine, you can apply this to politics, to agriculture, to pretty much any sphere. And what I discovered is that this story of separation generates endless crises that have the potential to birth us into a new story.
When you talk about have the potential to birth us into a new story, do you think that we needed to feel the separateness so that we could get back into, wow, that didn't work, let's try something else, so to speak,
Yeah, in a way, it's not a new story. It's actually a very ancient story. So we're coming back, you could call it reunion or interbeing, the understanding that there's something of the world in me, that what I do to the world, I do to myself, that your well-being and my well-being and the well-being of the Amazon and of all of the people who are oppressed or othered, they're connected to me too. So it's not like we're discovering some grand new theory here, but what would be new would be to build a civilization on that. And not just a hunter-gatherer tribe or a village, but to actually have a civilization that isn't about domination and separation, in which we understand our intimate connection to nature and to all of the things that haven't been included in modern society, and anything that you call holistic or alternative. Those are pounding at the doors. Sometimes I would say clamoring to get in, but it's actually more like inviting us out to play with them.
Do you think, what kind of radical, or maybe not so radical shifts, I mean, is it really radical? Is it possible to have all the stuff that humans have created and all the technology, and you hear about, 5G is bad and this is bad. Can we have all of that technology and all that stuff and have this connection with the bigger picture?
I think a better question might be, do we want all of that technology? And do we want all of that stuff? We were supposed to have a technological utopia by now,
Mhm.
with robot servants and infinite lifespans and suffering engineered out of existence through nanochemicals and whatever. Um, and it seemed that we were making a lot of progress up through the mid 20th century. But since then, the future has been postponed again and again. It's like a mirage or a rainbow that's always on the horizon, no matter how fast you run toward it. And we're really beginning to ask, like, okay, 5G, I mean, is it really going to help your life that much to be able to download your streaming video in 5 seconds rather than a minute? You know, like, can't we do better than an Internet of Things where your refrigerator can order eggs for you when you run out? I mean, come on. Like, there's so many ways that we could develop that may not depend on more and more technology, more and more control, like that allow us to do things more efficiently. What about doing things more beautifully? What about doing things more playfully? There's so many ways we could develop. And I think that the impasse that we are facing right now as a society, where like none of our customary ways of solving our crises are working, that's asking us to stop, to take a pause, you know, and to ask, what kind of future do we actually want? And let's choose it consciously rather than being impelled down a path of inevitability that isn't really what we want.
So you started to kind of ask the question I was going to ask you next. What world do you see post COVID, post the emotional unrest that's going on in our, specifically in the U.S., but around the world right now? What do you hope to see comes from this experience of 2020?
Yeah, I mean that would take a long time to really flesh out, but certainly we're seeing some warning signs and some very hopeful signs. For example, the COVID has crystallized many longstanding trends. Social distancing is not actually anything new. We've been becoming more and more distant from each other, more and more of life happening indoors, more and more of our social interaction happening uh, through computers, more and more just ordering things and they come to your house without ever having to interact with another human being. And the role of the public space of physical gatherings becoming less and less important. Now we're being shown that in extreme form. Do we want that? Uh, the trend toward totalitarian tracking of every movement and every transaction that has been in place for a long time. Do we want that? Do we want a world forevermore where we don't hug, where we don't gather for weddings and festivals and churches and yoga classes? Um, we're being shown a destination and asked, do we choose that? Or having seen it, maybe we want to pick up on some of the other beautiful things that are happening, both in with COVID and with civil unrest, where things that had been kind of tolerated before, like police killings um, of Black people, or police violence in general, we're noticing now that what was once tolerable is no longer tolerable to the mass society. And that is throwing us into exactly the question that you're asking. I'm not even sure if it's of service to try to answer that question, but really more to affirm that that is the right question and that we can do anything, like you were saying before, when humanity is united in common cause. All of the things that had seemed impossible, like we could never afford that, or that's politically impractical. Now, I mean, 6 months ago, if people had said, well, let's defund the police, that would have been waved away as a fairy tale. And now we're actually being asked to look into that. And what would that mean? And what would we do to stay safe and to enforce social norms? Is enforce even the right word? What could justice mean when it's not equated to punishment? Like, these are opening up questions that I can't give a short answer to, but there's a vast body of thought that has been outside the mainstream and developing for decades now that can answer some of these questions.
Well, I think that what you said about outside the mainstream, being a part of the sort of new thought, new age spiritual movement I'm like a baby. It's only been really 20 years for me. But when the bleep came out, it was such a radical thing, right? It was like we were some sort of crazy people that we had put this movie out. And now 20 years later, it's almost mainstream, a lot of the stuff that we talked about in that film. And I see that that's part of what I see happening right now. That's what makes me hopeful, is that there are people that I know in the world that would have never really dropped into the idea that their thoughts and how they perceive the world impacts the world they see, or that, wow, I am connected to you and we are connected to each other. And that sort of, that those concepts that were so woo-woo before, I think are kind of becoming mainstream. Do you see that?
Yeah. And it's not to, oversimplify those concepts and say something like, well, our beliefs create our reality,
Right.
because it's also true that our reality creates our beliefs.
Sure.
But we could say that we are in relationship, that
Mhm.
reality is a relationship. And that's really what the story of interbeing says, that that reality, that self is a relationship. And that opens up a lot of new questions. What is exactly the nature of the relationship between self and other, between story and reality, between mind and body? And I think that as we explore those questions, we discover that reality and therefore possibility are much bigger than has been told us by a cosmology based on force, where there are these four forces of nature and things only happen if you make them happen. And there's no happening, no coherent happening bigger than us. Once we let that in the door, then all of the things that were, alternative or woo-woo, as you said, it's like, wow, actually, maybe that's not irrational to believe in spontaneous healing of stage 4 cancer or psi phenomena or uh, uh, reincarnation or extraterrestrials or like any of these other things that like these have, most people actually believe in one or another of these things or follow astrology or something like that. But there's been this wall of division between those and political reality and practicality. Even people who follow those things tend to put them in a separate category. Perhaps what we're being offered right now is the opportunity to bring some of those things in, especially, it's coming up in medicine, where the initial response was actually to exclude everything alternative. They get, censored from Facebook. The WHO condemns them. You don't see very much funding for alternative therapies that boost immunity. It's like the last 40 years of alternative medicine never happened. But I think that once we get over the panic response, where we flee back to the old orthodoxy, a lot more people are going to be like, hold on a minute here. Isn't there another way besides escalating control over society, control over the body, control over the microbes, keep them out, lock them down, kill them? Isn't there some other way where we accept our participation in the web of relationship, which includes social relationships, which includes microbial relationships, that understands that we're part of an ecology and that health cannot come through isolation? Life does not thrive in isolation. Life thrives in relationship. So I'm not going to say that that's an inevitable future, but it is one that is being offered to us right now to claim and to build upon.
I love what you just said. That was so great. Thank you. Do you have hope for the future?
Yeah, I have hope sometimes gets a bad name in spiritual circles now. But I think that what hope actually is, authentic hope, is a prevision of a future that is actually possible and whose possibility does not depend on, oh, maybe if other people do the right thing, maybe this, maybe that, but that it comes down to our own agency, something that we can choose. Sometimes my mind says that it's not possible. There's too many problems, too many barriers. There's the power elite, the whatever conspiracy theory you want to conjure. But my heart knows that it is possible. And that knowledge, it doesn't come, like I could buttress it with evidence, but it's fundamentally not coming from evidence in the normal sense. But it comes from the knowledge I get when I'm standing with my bare feet on the soil. It comes from the knowledge I get in certain mystical experiences. It's knowledge that's in my body. It's the knowledge I get when I look at another person and I see their divinity and I'm like, how could I ever be pessimistic when you exist, when you are so powerful, when you are so beautiful? It's when I look at a parking lot that's been neglected for 20 years and weeds and grass are bursting through the cracks and it's returning to beauty. And I know that life tends toward wholeness inexorably. Even if we try to stop it, we have to make great efforts to prevent beauty from breaking out all over the place. So yeah, I am optimistic for those reasons and some others.
Wow, that's terrific. Well, good. That's perfect. I have exactly what I need for my little piece. That was short and sweet. Is there anything that you'd like to add or say briefly that you think might be helpful?
I'll just say that in order for us to really take a new course, we have to bring in all of the data points. And that includes the good stuff, the amazing stuff, the miraculous stuff that's been left out. And it also includes the most painful, ugly facts about the world too, that we can feel grief about, that we can really integrate the horrors and traumas of the world in addition to the joy and the miracles, so that we are operating with a full palette. Then we have full information and we can be precise and realistic. Realistic. Like we have to take it all in to be realistic.
Well, that's part of what I see as coherency. I think we've been as a species, at least for so long, the idea of pushing away all of the dark and the negative and hiding from it or pretending it doesn't exist has made us not whole. So I don't.
Right.
How can we move forward if we're not cleaning up and integrating everything so that we can? A friend of mine said this to me the other day, and I thought it was so wise. She says, I'm not really about tearing down all the statues just yet. I think we should sit with them for a while and hear their story so that we don't repeat it. But the generation and the people that are around right now haven't sat with these things and really done the work around integrating and healing and doing the work needed around it so that we can move forward in a fresh way. I thought that was
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, the people who those statues were made in the likeness of, they didn't do the things they did because they were bad people. You know, they did as people did in those circumstances. And if we just tear them down, are we really taking the opportunity to understand the circumstances that give birth to racism and exploitation and genocide? Or are we just going to blame it on bad people and never look deeper? If we never look deeper, it's going to happen again. Yeah.
yeah. Well, terrific. Well, Charles, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.